If you've been listening to the Business of Biotech podcast for a while now, you'll recall that Erin Harris has joined me to co-host a few episodes. Erin's my friend, colleague, and chief editor over at cellandgene.com, and she just recently launched a podcast of her own. It's aptly named Cell and Gene, the podcast. And if you're working in the cell and gene space, you should give it a listen. It's a collection of interviews with the industry and academic leaders moving the space forward. And you can find it at cellandgene.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cell and Gene, the podcast. Check it out. A while back, I wrote a story for Bioprocess Online about a new company that's anchoring a biotech investment surge in Columbus, Ohio. The company is called Forge Biologics, and its co-founder, president, and CEO is a man named Dr. Timothy Miller. Forge is a unique play in that Dr. Miller, a microbiologist turned biotech entrepreneur, founded the company on the mission to develop biologic therapies for infantile Krabbe disease. But to fund that endeavor, he and his co-founders decided to offer biopharmaceutical CDMO services. Today, the company aims to become one of the world's largest biologics contract development and manufacturing companies. For his part, Dr. Miller is no stranger to emerging biotech leadership. After earning his BS and MS in molecular biology at John Carroll and a Ph.D. in pharmacology and molecular biology at Case Western, he began his career as a scientist at Copernicus Therapeutics and senior scientist at Juventus Therapeutics. Then he took the product development lead at CeroneRx Therapeutics, moved on to serve as president and CSO, as well as president and CEO at Abeona Therapeutics, and then president and CEO at Gene Therapy Company before launching Forge Biologics in 2020. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's episode of the Business of Biotech, we are going to learn about Forge and Dr. Miller, and we're going to dig deep into a discussion on the contract biologics development and manufacturing crunch and how to navigate it. This is quite the intro there, Dr. Miller. It's great to see you again, and welcome to the show.
Matt, thanks for having me back.
It's my pleasure. Yeah. So as I alluded to in my long-winded intro of your background and where you came from, you're first and foremost a biologics therapy developer and innovator. You were that before you were the leader of a CDMO. And it's an interesting story. The way I understand it, you were motivated to build this CDMO company by virtue of the fact that you wanted to develop and innovate a biologic approach to infantile Krabbe disease. So tell us that story. Let's hear the genesis from your own mouth.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's been an interesting road to get here, and it's been fun to watch the gene and cell therapy space particularly grow since the 2013-2014 timeframe, when you really started to see a real big uptick. And we'll talk a little bit later maybe about some of we think about the IPO classes of 2015 to 2018 and how that impacted. But really the story began out of a desire to really find novel therapies and provide them to patients in need, right? There are over 7,000 rare diseases, and that number continues to grow. And 90+% of them are ones that do not have a therapy that's in development. And when you couple that with the ones that are in development, that manufacturing for novel gene therapies is in such high demand, and really, especially in today's world over the past 2 years, in competition, right, with COVID manufacturing, because a lot of the biologics manufacturing and raw materials and resources have been taken up to really meet the supply for the pandemic.
Right.
It makes for a very interesting crunch on the CDMO space. And our origin story, a lot of us were therapeutics developers. Many of us had built out manufacturing for gene therapy centers in our past. And we said, well, what if we meld the two? And, we were able to use basically help a lot of our colleagues develop and manufacture their drugs that they need to have manufactured, as well being able to manufacture our own. And there are a lot of synergies that go with that, right? Because now we can control our own manufacturing for our own pipeline. That's a huge cost savings. But when we think about it, what's the most critical element in this story? It's how we think about time. And time being the enemy for patients, it's the enemy for investors, it's the enemy for companies. So that's really, how we thought about this was, can we figure out a way to help everyone capitalize and save time?
It's fascinating when I think about what those meetings must have looked like, between you and your co-founders. You know, was there sort of a whiteboard approach where you went, okay, look, like we want to develop this pipeline?
If it's helpful, I can send you a picture of one of our first planning sessions in our office space that's got stickies all over the wall, right? Of how we're thinking about the idea sessions and what's important, the values for the company, ideas we wanted to go down. That actually was really, literally on the first week that we found our building that we wanted to go in and basically renovate to make into the CDMOs into the hearth.
Yeah. That'd be cool. Was it a conscious, did there come a point where there's this conscious decision? We do not want to pursue our pipeline in the traditional manner of like, let's go out there and spend, pound the pavement, raise the money, focus specifically on it. Was there a point where there was this conscious decision, we're going to create, manufacturing space and effectively in development space and rent out our expertise?
Yeah, I think the importance around that was really the size of scale. And when we think about, having 2 or 3 or maybe 4 products in a pipeline, you can often control the manufacturing for that in-house to a point, right? Especially if you're in an eye, there's a huge difference. It could be 1,000-fold or more difference in the amount of virus that you have to make or amount of drug that you have to make, whether you're going in for an eye therapy versus something that's going into muscle or, into something that needs to get all throughout the body. So when you think about the scale, and if you've got just a couple of pipeline products, you quickly surpass your internal capabilities to be able to develop that farther. Mm-hmm. It's why you're seeing so much energy and so much investment dollars being put into, to basically meet the FDA's statement of we expect to see 20 to 25 therapies, in 2025. To be able to get through a year, to get through that, you're going to need to basically build out the supply chain and the manufacturing.
For sure. Yeah. At the same time, because of that, right? Because of that mandate, if you will, and because of just the pace of innovation and the volume of innovation in biologics, it's kind of easy to see that having some premium CDMO space is a sound business bet. If you build it, they're going to come. But to create that space, I've got to imagine that it's a very capital intensive project, right? Like more so in many ways. It's more capital intensive than launching a biopharma per se. So tell me about that. Like what was the approach there?
Yeah, so a lot of biopharmers will start virtual, right? When you're thinking about a contract manufacturing facility, you've got to have basically a building to be able to do that. And as we think about how you do that, there are 2 main ways. You can go and do a greenfield build out, which is super capital intensive and takes, again, time, right? We'll come back to that theme of time throughout this discussion, but or you can find a building that's already built that has certain predefined characteristics that you want in particularly a gene therapy manufacturing organization. And so we looked around the Columbus area at probably 20 or 25 buildings and finally found one that met all of our needs. And it's beautiful. It's 175,000 square feet right now. It'll be closer to 200,000 when we build out another floor or 2. But right now, we've spent the past year since the Series A building out the GMP facility. And again, we can talk more down that as well.
Sure. Yeah. And we covered some of this in the article, but I want to touch on it here too for the folks who didn't see that. Columbus, it's an interesting, so from my perspective, I think I may have mentioned this to you last time we talked. I live 4+ hours away from Columbus, Ohio. My wife still finds cause to drive out there on several occasions throughout the year to go shopping because there's it's known. Columbus is known for its retail headquartership. It's a shopping mecca, if you will. The biotech space there is the growth there is relatively new there. Why was Columbus a good fit for a Rochester native?
Did you know that within a few hundred miles of Columbus is 50% of the U.S. population?
I guess it makes sense.
Yep. And Columbus is a huge growth environment. It's seen some of the largest and fastest growth in the past 5 years for biotech, and it's home of Drive Capital. The population is generally very well educated. With a lot of the, I think a third of the population has a bachelor's degree or higher, and as we just think about the investment dollars that are coming in with Drive, having over $1 billion under management. They're the largest Midwest VC group, and they wanted to come in and back Forge. So when you couple a lot of these factors, in addition to being tied to, nationwide, Ohio State, and just between Cleveland and Cincinnati, huge ability to bring in workforce, which is one of the key things that a manufacturing company needs.
Yep. Yeah, very cool. I want to stick with funding real quick because you mentioned Drive and you mentioned your Series A. Is there a distinction between, like, when you in this hybrid model that you're in, when you go out and you're seeking funding and you're winning that Series A, for instance, is there a distinction that has to be made between funding for the therapeutic that you're developing in your pipeline and funding for the manufacturing capacity that may or may not be outsourced to other colleagues in the space, or is the therapeutic just kind of like being funded by your own internal revenue?
One of the really fun things about Forge is the model that we operate under. So we operate under what's called the hub and spoke model. Mm-hmm. So you have, if you think of this as a kind of a flow chart, at the top, you have a private LLC that gets all of the funding. So all the funding comes in and just basically holds the money. And then that is pushed downstairs into what are subsidiaries, which are C Corps. And so, we have a choice, and we review with the board, every quarter, and of course every year, just how we're, pushing spend, into the subs. The company is 90% focused on the CDMO space. Mm-hmm. And because, again, we control our own manufacturing, we remove 50% of the cost roughly of a typical therapeutic development path through clinical trials. So you can do this and you can repeat, rinse and repeat, for each one of these therapeutics, and it allows you to expand the pipeline a bit faster. It allows you to manage that virtually, because again, you manage through service contracts across the subs. But all of the employees sit within the CDMO of Forge Biologics. And we have a new cycle that we're rolling out later this year where we will announce some of the subsidiaries. And one of them, contains our Krabbe asset, which we publicly announced. So it's a really neat way to go about it because you enable multiple financial strategies. You can fund at the subsidiary level, right? But from a manufacturing perspective, and we focus on our clients first, and we kind of fit our pipeline in and around.
The Business of Biotech is brought to you in partnership with Cytiva. Together, we're committed to helping the leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies navigate the financial, organizational, human resources, and regulatory waters you'll encounter on your way from discovery to the clinic and beyond. Check out a host of useful resources for biotech leaders at Cytiva's Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA lifesciences.com/emerging biotech. So let's talk about that the CDMO capacity crunch that I mentioned we wanted to get to, and I'm curious about your just take on, as I mentioned from the outset. I mean, it seems like a safe bet, right? All signs are pointing to we don't have enough space to develop the promise of biologics. From your perspective, I don't expect you to, be a Wikipedia page on, outsourced capacity, but just how short are we coming up right now?
Well, I want to focus, you said something really important there, right? The promise of biologics, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to point out how COVID and how science behind making, the COVID vaccines have really pushed the importance of things like gene therapy, because at the end it's a type of gene therapy, into the public forefront, right, into the public conscience. And just, people have heard for months now about the manufacturing crunch and demands that, they've only been able to make so many vaccines, per day, per week, to be able to give out. From our perspective, even in gene therapies, that has had an impact. Many of the bioreactors and contract development companies have had essentially a lot of their facilities co-opted to be able to make, vaccines. So, but as it relates to, that capacity crunch as a CDMO, think about it from this perspective. So when you sit down and got presumably your COVID vaccine shot, it took about, 5 seconds, and, they injected a few hundred microliters in.
Mm-hmm.
To give an adult patient, okay, that same level of dose for a gene therapy, okay, to be able to treat, not just a rare disease, but even something like, hemophilia, to be able to treat something like that, you'd have to sit down and get that same shot about 2,000 times a day for a year. Okay, and that's to treat one patient. So think about that from the number of bioreactors that you need to actually have to be able to treat, patients that, around the world for a particular patient population. But when you add that in and thinking about the amount of pipeline, if you've got 4, 5, 10 programs, it's a huge demand on your space. So it's not just about the cost, it's just simply about the footprint that you have to put those bioreactors in, the scale that you've got them in, and really probably the most important point is the people to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great segue because I wanted to ask you about the kind of interrelation between footprint capacity shortfall and people. And again, it's interesting to me that you're in Columbus and people being such an important part of the equation. I guess I'll make this a sort of a multi-part question. What is the expertise? What does the expertise shortfall look like? How is that solved, and how are you guys solving that in Columbus?
Well, we recently announced a workforce development partnership with Case Western Reserve University, where we are working with them due to the excellent leadership up in Cleveland at Case to implement a GMP, or a good manufacturing practice, essentially, I don't want to say certification, but training program, where people can enroll in the program. It's an 8 to 10 week program with an add-on course at the end, and it teaches you the basics of how to work in an extremely clean environment. So full gowning, basic, sterile technique, some hands-on assay work. And, we are working with them so that people that complete the course and pass the test at the end get an interview at Forge. So, we see this as a turn cycle where we're building an ecosystem in the Midwest, particularly in Ohio, to continue to build that workforce. Forge is currently at about 115 employees. When we finished the Series A, we had 4 people. Mm-hmm. Okay, and in a year, raised 160 million and built a workforce of 115 people.
Yeah. I don't want that to get lost on our audience. As I said in the intro, founded in 2020. I mean, it's incredible growth already.
Yeah, raising $160 million in a pandemic was not forecasted that particular way. It was certainly an interesting experience, something a little new. But I think one of the most fun things about building the company has been more than 50%. I think of the company has basically been a referral or worked with a previous colleague. So there's a lot of people that came into Forge that wanted to work with some previous colleagues again. And that's important in gene and cell therapy because the manufacturing expertise is a rare commodity. And you can go online to any one of the therapeutics companies that's got some manufacturing, just look at all the jobs that are open. It's a huge need in the space.
Yeah. I want to invite you to get back to the theme that you mentioned earlier around time and share with me just how important CDMO capacity is for emerging biopharmas, entering the clinic, moving into, mid-stage clinicals. How important is the CDMO relationship in terms of speed of development and speed to clinic?
It's critical. Many therapeutics companies and pure play therapeutics companies are founded on the science, right? And the promise of the science to help patients. But you have to manufacture it. So going to a manufacturer that has really done it before, both at the small scale, but also converting and scaling up to something that's larger. There are many academic facilities that can make, and labs that can make things at the very small scale, right? A petri dish or a couple of petri dishes worth of virus. when you put it in a bioreactor and you need to scale it in a way that the FDA or the EMA, right, find appropriate to get into a clinical trial setting, that's a significant challenge. And developing those relationships very early on is what makes a company successful for the manufacturing down the long haul. And important to point out that the FDA really looks at this as a partnership to try to work through, but at the same time, the bar has risen over the past 5 years on what the FDA and EMA are looking at manufacturing from a gene therapy perspective. Mm-hmm. And so from our side, we've sat on that side of the table, right, as therapeutics developers, and now also as manufacturing partners are able to help a lot of our clients with that thought process. So developing that relationship early is really, really important.
Yeah. Okay. It just occurred to me that I'm terrible with analogies. My wife will tell you my analogies are terrible. I think I just came up with a good one though that'll really resonate with you, and it's in relation to COVID. You mentioned that the COVID vaccine has played a very important role in the speed of development of manufacturing capacity, right? Like the awareness of the power of biologics. But so you're from Rochester. I grew up in Buffalo. I kind of liken it to a snow plow, right? Like, okay, so bear with me here. You got a snow plow and it's pushing snow, right? It's pushing snow, and behind that snow plow is a whole bunch of traffic. And they recognize the importance of that snow plow. It's got to get the snow out of the road, right? It's doing a very important work. But that traffic wants to move faster. They want to get around that snowplow. So as it relates to CDMO space, it just came to me on the spot. As it relates to the CDMO space, right? The waiting game is something we hear all the time, right? We talk to new and emerging, nimble, agile. It's part of their culture. These biopharmas want to move quick and they're nimble and they're agile. But they get to this CDMO stage and it's like the wheels just come to a grind. There are those cars that want to get around the snowplow, and the snowplow is kind of held up by the snow, which is, like, in our case, maybe COVID, right? Like there's a lot of capacity that's being consumed by COVID. Terrible analogy?
Great analogy. Great analogy.
Thank you.
Great analogy. And, there's some important things about that analogy, though, that you think about, right? One is, how big is the road and how wide is it? Right. And that's actually a great analogy when you think about the capacity of some manufacturers, right? Because you're walking down a small you're trying to get behind that snowplow. It's a single lane, mm-hmm. right? And on others, for our larger manufacturers, you may have other lanes that are open because they're just plowing that one lane. Mm-hmm. And so, that throughput, that capacity is an important reflection, I think, on in an analogy of just how you think about CDMOs. And we can keep going down this rabbit hole and talk about the salt that's coming out, and the quality of the salt that's coming out the back. I mean, that's an important thing when you think about the analytical development, So, we can keep going down the snowplow analogy as much as you want. And be careful, because I'm an analogy guy and I will drop Star Wars references on you. Okay,
that's all right. That's all right. Listen, I feel good. I feel a little bit vindicated because you dropped a good analogy when someone who's a lot smarter than you can build on your analogy and make it even better. So thank you. No, I think it is it's an interesting point though, and I think maybe this is where the salt analogy comes in. When you reach that, ready for a CDMO level, there are a lot of options, or even before that, right? Like way preclinical discovery stage, you have a lot of options for partnership. And it occurs to me, I'm relatively new to the space, but even in the past 12 months, it feels like anecdotally that a lot of those options are kind of morphing together, right? Like it used to be pretty clear-cut distinctions between incubators and, translational centers and CDMOs and CMOs and CROs. They all kind of had their own lane. I see more of that kind of, more of those services kind of coming together earlier, perhaps. What's your take on that?
Well, it's an important aspect because, again, we come back to some of the regulatory requirements now that when you do something at the discovery stage, you're often in one process. You might be on what's called an adherent or a fixed bed type of growth. And then you need to scale that up to something much bigger to get into a clinical trial. And that becomes a suspension process. Well, you have to show compatibility or comparability between those two, basically the lot that was made at a discovery side in one process and something that's bigger in clinical in a different process. So not many academic manufacturers can bridge, a client's or a therapeutics program. Forge can do that. And in fact, our process, we have a Blaze production center that uses the same cell line, the same process, same facility, can use that all the way through up and through your clinical and then commercial development. So you're starting to see a little bit of that, I think, in the space. But it's one of the things that we really, because many of us had that pain point in some of our regulatory interactions, said we can solve that right out of the gate. And there's one important, thing about that too. And we're talking about cells, right? Cells that actually end up making these, these products. And many academic facilities and some CROs, the cell line story is an important one. Okay, because you want to be able to take that all the way through your clinical to commercial process. Many academic facilities have a cell line that's got a black box origin that the FDA has said you can't take that cell line in that process to commercial. You can do that here at Forge. And so again, when you think about establishing that type of basis with how can a group that's developing a therapeutics early set themselves up for success very early? That's one of the key parameters.
Yeah. If I were, so let's say I'm a biopharma and I'm at a point where it's going to make strategic sense for me to partner with a company like Forge, and I were to come to you and we were simpatico, right? Like we what I was developing was well within your wheelhouse. You had the capacity, or potentially had the capacity. What does the wait time, if you will, look like right now?
Yeah, we talk about queues a lot at different groups, and we think of the emerging CDMOs and the existing, and then some of the premium. A lot of the premium CDMOs have their queues backed up into mid to late 2022 at this point. Forge, as existing, we've kind of moved out of the emerging and into the existing groups. We have capacity now that we can take people in Q4 and already planning into Q1 and Q2 for 2022. So we can take clients now. We're in probably over 24 discussions right now. It takes a while to work through a lot of the paperwork and the selection process, but we have capacity now and can take clients. Usually the conversation starts with tell us about your timeline. Talk to us about, your plasmid DNA, the stuff that makes the viruses, or stuff like how's your regulatory interactions going? We offer as a service to help out with that too.
Yep. Okay. What is the appropriate time for a biopharma to engage with you? I mean, or is that too? I'm sure there are a lot of variables, but.
Well, I'm going to bring it back to your snowplow analogy and say the time was when you were starting to look at the weather forecast and saw that there was some snow coming in, when you needed to think about, hey, I need to get from A to B. Didn't want to be behind a snowplow. Right. So, I think that you want to talk to any of the companies that are doing CDMO functions, early in your program development.
What's the key to, you mentioned looking at the forecast, and I think, 18 months ago, looking at the forecast probably wouldn't have done you much good, because nobody forecasted what was coming, right? Nobody saw that. Nobody saw that front coming down the road. Under more normal operating circumstances, what are some indicators that, there might be some capacity crunch coming, or there might be something to look forward to, or look out for, that might preclude me from, a timely engagement with a CDMO?
Well, often people get stuck in preclinical development. They're trying to figure out, the safety profile and the correct dosing that needs to be for their patient population. And probably the best analogy that you can draw back to is really, we'll go back to the COVID vaccine stories, right? I mean, FDA required them to be approved in adults first, older than 18. And then it moved into, 12 and up. And now they're looking at under 12.
Yep.
Many programs in the gene and cell therapy space have to go through the same exact process. And, that's really, it still can be a 2, 3, 4 year process for them to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you anticipate that moving forward, the capacity crunch will kind of work itself out? Are we on pace at all to address getting to where we need to be in terms of having the space and expertise to move forward?
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to everyone getting vaccinated, and there being essentially an opening in the supply chain of some of the things that went into the COVID manufacturing. So I do think that crunch, is going to open up hopefully in the next 6 to 8 months. Mm-hmm. But there's probably a corollary to that whole thing, Matt, that says, look, we got a vaccine approved, from clinical trial to, commercialization in a year. Mm-hmm. Let's see if we can do that, with a lot of the therapies that are under development for patients that have nothing else that are out there.
What do you think is key to this? Boy, you just opened yourself up to a great big giant question. What are the keys to enabling that? I mean, I've had this conversation with multiple folks over the past 6 or 8 months, where it's like, okay, we recognize that not every promising therapy that's in phase 3 is going to get an EUA. But there are lessons that we can take away from what's going on right now that could potentially expedite approvals and forward progress. What are some of those, from your perspective, what are some of those lessons that might bear fruit post-COVID?
Yeah, I think frequent interactions with the regulatory agencies is probably one of the biggest things that is helpful. And basically once things get set, that once they're agreed upon, that once they are met, the goalposts don't move, for example. That can often be a challenge for many companies. You do something that are asked for, and you submit everything in, and they say that's great, but you've got to do a little bit more. And sometimes that's fair because new questions come up, right? I mean, it's science, and science teaches us that you test the hypothesis, and when more data comes back in, you go back and you come up with more questions. But good and frequent interactions is probably the biggest place to start.
Yep. Okay. All right. A couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you off the hook. I'm curious, given the situation that you're in right now, building out, freshly and probably continuing, right? The build outs there in terms of manufacturing space. How are you seeing technology play a role in creating efficiencies, like new manufacturing technologies, new IT, information technologies? How are they playing a role in creating efficiencies that are helping to address the capacity crunch that we're seeing?
There are many, from larger size bioreactors to new cell lines that are being created, or even some of the more raw materials that allow for safer and more efficient production capacity. There's always, the cool thing is that we're always watching for the development. There are also new capsids. So when we think about viruses, the capsids, the shell that encapsulates everything, new ones being developed that are better at targeting specific cell types. So what that functionally does is it means you can do it with a lower dose, which could be safer. And that way you can dose more people. Mm-hmm. So all of these things are coming together in the gene and cell therapy space to really augment the manufacturing capacity, but also the manufacturing need.
Yep. Okay. What big problems remain to be addressed?
Well, I mean, everybody has the question of scale, right? Building up to a 5,000 liter bioreactor, I'm not sure there's anybody in the world that's done that with adeno-associated virus production capacity yet. So, new bounds, new horizons ahead, and again, trying to find better ways to work with multiple groups at the same time. It really just becomes it also becomes a workforce development challenge that you want to make sure you've got a strong workforce.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, good. Well, we're running short on time here, Dr. Miller. I want to give you an opportunity to conclude with any parting thoughts, any pieces of wisdom, any big news coming out of Forge, update on a pipeline, whatever. I'll let you choose the concluder.
We've got a lot of fun things coming up. We have a big Be the Match event partnership that we're doing that we'll talk about in the next few days, where bone marrow transplant, particularly for patients with Krabbe disease, is a life-saving procedure, but they still progress. And we're developing a novel, first of its kind in the world, approach that solves for both that, but bone marrow, but it still starts with bone marrow transplant. And we'll put out some stuff in the next week or so that talks about that. And I look forward to sharing.
Awesome.
But thanks, Matt, for having me on. Really great chatting with you, and love the questions.
Oh, I'm glad, Dr. Miller. Sometimes, as I noted, I'm not a linear thinker, so thank you for entertaining my rambling and circumlocuitous question set. But it's been a pleasure. I always enjoy talking with you. I look forward to the next time we have the opportunity to do so.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you. So that's Forge Biologics co-founder, president, and CEO, Dr. Tim Miller. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new biopharma companies at its emerging biotech accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. Visit that for some great resources, and please visit bioprocessonline.com where you can sign up for my newsletter. In the meantime, subscribe to the pod. If you like what you heard, give us 5 stars. And thanks for listening.